But the story I want to explore with you today takes place just a few days earlier, 2 miles out of town, in the town of Bethany. Same starting point as the triumphal entry. We're going to look at John chapter 11. So if you have your Bible, you can follow along. John chapter 11, and we're starting at verse 1. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus, so John is giving a little foreshadowing here. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." Okay, so Jesus is not in town. They sent word to tell them that Lazarus is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death." Now, we don't know exactly who he said it to. Maybe to his disciples, I guess. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Interesting little note there, right? Verse 5. Let's just look at that for a second. Verse 5. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister Mary and Lazarus. Interesting, just John puts that in. Jesus really loved them. Take note of that. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Now, hold on a minute. Didn't it just say that Jesus loved? Like, he goes out of the way to mention Jesus loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And he gets a note saying, Lazarus is very sick, please come. And Jesus heard this. And when he heard that, he decided to stay where he was 2 more days. This is a puzzling piece, isn't it? What? I thought he loved them. Let's go to verse 7. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." After 2 days, he decided, we will go back to Judea. "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago, the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you're going back?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by the world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." After he said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Well, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there." Again, puzzling, right? What a weird way of doing things. "For your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Again, John, the author of this, is foreshadowing things. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us go also, that we may die with him." On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." So Martha comes, she goes out of town, which I wanted to just point out, that the group was there, but Martha went out to meet Jesus. So he hadn't yet entered the town. Martha goes out to meet him and says to him, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died." There's not necessarily anything accusatory in there, but there's definitely a sense of disappointment. They had taken the initiative. They had sent word to Jesus to ask him to come. or to tell them, at least to tell him that Lazarus was sick, probably with the intent of asking Jesus to come. But in the end, he didn't. In the end, Jesus stayed 2 more days before coming. And so there's this tension that underlies the text here. What was Jesus doing? Why did he not go there? It says he loved them. What was he thinking? Now, the disciples went with him. They were aware that there was sort of a death threat toward Jesus. He was a wanted man, and Jesus was choosing to go back to the territory where he was a wanted man. So, that takes a bit of discernment. That might have been part of what he was doing, discerning what to be doing. John tries, again, to give some of this foreshadowing of what's going to happen to Jesus and what the power of Jesus can accomplish. I wanted to sort of just walk through a little bit of this with you. I'm looking at verse 17. So again, we look and we see that Jesus found Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. So wherever Jesus was, he stayed 2 days, and then it took him at least 2 days to get there, because when he arrived, we read that Lazarus was in the tomb for 4 days. Many Jews were there with Mary and Martha to comfort them. Martha went out to meet him and says, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died." She goes on to say, "But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." So she has a tone of hope. And they have this dialogue. Now Jesus engages with her in this conversation. Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again," in verse 23. Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." So she knows what Jewish theology is. She's been trained, she's been taught that at the last day there will be the day of the Lord, and those who have died and have been part of God's kingdom, who have that faith, they will rise at the last day. She knows that there will be a resurrection at the end of all things. So she confirms that, says, "Yes, I know he will rise again at the resurrection of the last day." But Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. She says, "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into this world." So she has a clear picture of who Jesus is. She's engaged with him and said, "If only you would have been here, I don't think he would have died. But I still believe he'll rise at the last day, and I still believe that you're the Messiah. So whatever this means that you just said, I'm the resurrection and the life, whatever you say, Lord, I believe it. I'm in." Her faith is strong. But after that, she leaves and she goes back to call her sister Mary. So she goes back to the house, calls Mary aside and says, "Mary, Jesus is there. The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. So again, Jesus has not come into the town. Martha had a little meeting with him outside of town. She goes back to tell Mary. Mary now goes out of town because it says here in verse 30, Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Now, it's interesting because she said the exact same thing as her sister. Both of them loved Jesus, believed Jesus. When he shows up, if you would have been here, he would not have died. In a sense, asking, why didn't you come sooner? Why didn't you come? I want to keep going, though. Verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. So what I want to camp out on today is the thing with the sisters. This if only. Now, I got to give credit. I got a bit of the idea of the if only from N.T. Wright. But it really captivated me that there's this tension there that the sisters who know Jesus and love Jesus, the text goes out of the way in verse 5 to tell us that Jesus loved them and Lazarus. They even refer to Lazarus as the one Jesus loved. Like there's all this love about. So it's very clear that Jesus loved them and they loved him. But these two sisters had sent word and Jesus stays put. He doesn't come when they call. And when he does come, they both have say the same thing. They both say, if only. Jesus, if only you would have been here. If only you would have been here, our brother wouldn't have died. Now, Martha and Mary are very different people. We have this from the other story even. Luke records the story where Jesus visits and Martha is busy with preparations and Mary is sitting at the teacher's feet listening and Martha is getting upset because Mary is just sitting there listening to Jesus teaching and she says, Jesus, she's triangulating, Jesus, can you tell my sister to get off her rear and come and help? We have a lot of preparations to make. And Jesus just said, well, in essence, you have a choice to make, and Mary's chosen the better thing, so it's not going to be taken away from her. Martha, hey, it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry about it. If the table isn't set exactly right, it's okay. If the bread isn't quite done, it's okay. If the fruit isn't quite, if the wine isn't quite, it's okay, Martha. Martha, it's all right. I'd like to think Martha is probably the older sister. If you look at how she behaves and the responsibility she feels and how she engages with Jesus, my guess is that Martha would be the older sister. She feels the responsibility. And Jesus, the neat thing here is that with two sisters that are very different, they both have the same if only, and when they encounter Jesus, they get different responses. And here's the point, that Jesus meets them where they're at. Jesus meets them where they're at. So with Martha, they have a conversation. She says, Jesus, if only you would have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And Jesus talks about your brother will live again. Yeah, I know, in the last day this will... Yeah, but he said, I am the resurrection. So he actually reveals something really special to Martha through this dialogue. I am the resurrection and the life. Me. Not just the last day. He's saying, actually, the future is now. The kingdom has come. I am the resurrection and the life. And she still doesn't really get it. But he has a dialogue with Martha. I'm sure Martha has grief. We all experience grief differently. I'm sure you've been to funerals where some people are laughing and some people are weeping and some people are just blank and everything in between. We all grieve differently. And Martha is engaged in a conversation with Jesus. It seems like that's what she needed. And you read about Mary, and there is no dialogue. There's just weeping. She gets the question out, and then she starts weeping. And then the people that came with her start weeping. And then Jesus starts weeping. That's it. So for Martha, there's a dialogue. And for Mary, he enters into her sorrow. Doesn't mean he wasn't sad before that, but there's a compassion in how Jesus engages with both sisters whom he loved and their if-onlys, even though there's a very different response. And that's, I guess, just where I want us to sit today a little bit, is to say, when has life caught you off guard? When you couldn't prepare for it? When has there been a time in your life that you've said, if only? If only. Jesus, if only you would have done something, this would be different. If only you would have shown up. If only I wouldn't have gone there. If only I would have had a better car. If only I would have made better choices. If only, there's so many things in life. If only. And they can lead us to hurts and regrets, wounds that we carry with us, sometimes for our entire lives. Because we can't go back and change the past. If only that person wouldn't have done that to me. If only I wouldn't have opened my big mouth. If only. Faith can feel risky. These are real things that happen in our lives. And we want to engage with Jesus. I want to encourage us to engage with Jesus with our if-onlys. We can't change the past, but if we're willing to engage with Jesus in our if-onlys, we can be changed. He can work to change us, to change what the past has left in us or on us or through us. And sometimes I think we're afraid to bring our if-onlys to Jesus. I want to point out the courage that these women, they knew who Jesus was. They knew he was the Messiah, but they also trusted him and knew him and was a friend, and they didn't flinch. They came, if only you would have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Maybe they weren't angry. Maybe it was, if only, Jesus. If only. What if Jesus really could do something about that if only? Faith can feel risky. I've had times, and maybe you have too, where I have not brought my if-onlys to Jesus because I didn't really want to know the answer. What if Jesus doesn't show up? What if Jesus doesn't do what I know he could? What if Jesus doesn't heal? What if Jesus doesn't save them? And so sometimes I think maybe we would rather not ask and not know, because I don't want to ask and get a no. That hurts. It feels like it hurts more to ask Jesus for something that really is significant and means a lot to us. It feels like it would hurt more to ask and get a no than it would to just not ask. So maybe we back away because that faith is risky. Because if he doesn't show up, and if he doesn't do what we asked, then where am I left? Then what do I know? I'm told Jesus loved me. It says Jesus loves these sisters and the brother. They were loved. He loved them. They loved him. But then he stays 2 more days. What's with that? It's kind of what they're saying when he shows up. What's with that, Jesus? we have these questions. If Jesus doesn't do what we ask when we try to have faith, what does it say about our faith? What does it say about our Jesus? What does it say about that relationship? What does it say about our trust? It's tough, isn't it? And if you follow Jesus for any amount of time, these are the rocky roads that we eventually travel. And believe me, these bumps shake us. They shake our faith. But I think it's important for us to see that it's not new, that it's not just us, and that actually faith can be had in the midst of a rocky road, in a bumpy relationship, and even in the midst of a no, or a not right now. And I think that in the end, God still wants us to walk by faith and to trust that in the big picture, God knows what He's doing. That God's ends will be accomplished. That God's mission will be fulfilled. And that's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to trust. But that's what I would like to encourage us in today. Now, many of you know the rest of the story, and you know that Lazarus is raised from the dead. That Jesus literally is the resurrection and life and calls Lazarus out. After 4 days, and even there's the objection of, whoa, he's going to stink. Like the body's decomposing already, Jesus. Are you sure you know it? So even when Jesus says, I'm going to fix this, they're still like, wait a minute. Do you realize he's been in there 4 days? Like his nose might have fallen off by now or something. Like, are you sure you can handle this, Jesus? Yeah, it was no problem. Lazarus, come out. And he does. And I know that we all have times where that doesn't happen, where we don't get the miracle. But the interesting thing is, every single thing that John writes here about the sisters would seem to indicate that their faith is not shaken. That as much as they're disappointed with Jesus, and as much as they say, if only you would have been here, they still know who He is. And even if He decided not to raise Lazarus, it wouldn't change the fact that He is the Messiah. He is God who loves them, who has come to be with them, who is present with them in their grief. Even that's an important thing. Like, we know the story, so it's hard for us to sit in the tension, but Jesus wept. He really entered into this with them. Not condescendingly, not like, wait till you see what I do next, ladies. Like, no. It was deeply felt. And I would just remind you, He's the same today. And when we feel the weight of those things, those if only, Lord, if only you would have done this, if only you would do this. I can't do anything for you in that. I can just encourage you to say that He is trustworthy and He loves you. And I think he would want you to still bring that to him. When you're broken, when you don't know why he didn't show up, or why he would choose this, when you did everything you could, and you did ask. And that's some of the frustrating mystery of following Jesus. I don't know why he would stay 2 more days. Except in this case, we have hindsight, and the author explains that this was done so that the glory of God could be manifest. So that the disciples could believe, because Jesus ultimately is preparing them to believe in the resurrection. Because in a very short amount of time, Jesus himself is going to die. And they haven't really gotten that. When he's told them verbally, they didn't get it. I'm going to have to suffer. I'm going to have to die. I'm going to be dead, but I'll come back. Yeah, sure. Do another miracle. The interesting thing is that John doesn't call them miracles, he calls them signs. Because signs point to something. And so when Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, it points to him being the resurrection. It points to him coming back from the grave, to defeating death itself. And so John includes this. This is an important story to say, yeah, because you guys aren't going to get it. But when Jesus is gone and you're in the depths of despair and you have no idea what sort of a cockamamie plan this is to come and save the world by dying, I'm sorry, what? And Jesus said, don't forget, I did it here, and you'll see me soon. But I have to go through this. And so he's actually preparing the disciples and even preparing us and trying to help us have the faith to see Jesus can do it. And help us to think in the way of the kingdom that has come, of the resurrection that will happen at the end, but that it has actually come in the person of Jesus. And he can resurrect dead places in our lives. He can resurrect people if he chooses. But he has the power. The power of God is not limited even by death. And my call and encouragement to us would be, when we have our if-onlys, Jesus, if only you would, to bring those to him again, to risk bringing those to him again. Bring the hurt. Jesus, I brought this last time and I felt ignored. I felt like you didn't hear me. I know you didn't answer me because you didn't do what I thought. You didn't do what I asked. You didn't do what I prayed. And I want to come to you again, and I'd like to trust you again, but to be honest, I'm having a hard time with that. But I think as followers, we can work through with the power of the Holy Spirit and a loving community. We can work through some of these things. It might take days, weeks, months, years. But together we can lend each other faith when we don't have enough for ourselves. I can lend you mine, you can lend me yours. We can stand with you in those times of grief and question when we don't have answers. And I think what we can continue to do is say, Jesus, please show up. Because I don't want to say if only. I want to say if Jesus. If Jesus does this, if Jesus shows up, if Jesus transforms us, if Jesus renews us, if Jesus heals us, what could be redeemed? What could be resurrected? How could we see that happen in our community? I'm seeing it happen in our church family. I think God wants to do that in us so that we can share it with others. To bring healing and wholeness and truth and love and presence. And I think more than anything, as we learn to love each other in these ways, it's changing us. And people will see that they love one another. And we can walk forward in that and say, if Jesus, if you show up, we can do this. Jesus, if you show up, we can do this. We don't want to do it without you. We don't want to attempt anything without you because you are our God. You are our strength. You are our hope. And I think in the end, that is it. That we are not to be people without hope. Even in the midst of grief, even in the midst of trial, even in the midst of tragedy, we are not to live like people who don't have hope. And we see that in the story because Martha says, I know he will be raised in the day of the resurrection. In that final day, I know Jesus. So it's not that I don't have hope, but I'm really missing my brother, and I know you have the power that you could have stopped this from happening. So it's this contrast of if only you would have been here, and I'm so mad, sad, frustrated, maybe angry, confused by why you didn't come. But at the same time, I know that you are Jesus, the Messiah, and there's nothing you can't do. And I know that God, you have a plan, and I know that there will be a resurrection. I know that you're faithful to your people, and so I will continue to have faith.